An old man sat alone at the airport for 3 days, but when he finally spoke, it shocked the staff. The old man arrived at the airport early in the morning. He carried a small bag and walked slowly. His clothes were clean but simple. His hair was gray and neatly combed. He sat down in a chair near the arrival gates and didn't move much after that. He didn't seem to be waiting for a flight, and he didn't try to leave the building. He just sat there, quiet and still. At first, no one paid much attention to him. Airports are busy places, and many people come and go each day. A man sitting quietly didn't seem out of place. But as the hours passed, some staff began to notice that he hadn't moved. By the end of the day, he was still in the same spot. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't ask for help or directions. He just sat, watching the same doors over and over. The next day, he was still there. He had not left during the night. He sat in the same chair, in the same position. A few people offered him food or water, but he shook his head. He didn't say anything. He didn't even smile. He just looked tired and distant. His eyes stayed fixed on the arrival area, as if he was waiting for someone. Some thought he might be lost. Others believed he was confused. A few joked that he might be living in the airport, but no one knew for sure. He had no boarding pass. He had no papers. He didn't use his phone. He didn't even have a book or newspaper. He had only the clothes on his back and a small bag that he kept close to his feet. Security passed by him many times, but since he wasn't causing trouble, they left him alone. Still, they kept watch. The airport was a public place, and people could sit there, but not forever. Rules had to be followed. Yet this man broke none of them. He wasn't loud. He wasn't begging. He wasn't blocking anything. He was just there. As the second day went on, his presence became more noticeable. Staff members whispered about him in break rooms. Some wondered if he had been dropped off and forgotten. Others guessed he might be waiting for a family member. But there were no signs, no clues, and no answers. He said nothing, and he asked for nothing. The cleaning crew noticed that he hardly moved. When they cleaned the floors around him, he gently moved his feet aside and then placed them back. When they wiped down the seats, he simply stood up and sat back down when they were done. He nodded sometimes to show he understood, but he still didn't speak. By the end of the second night, he looked even more tired. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly. He still hadn't eaten much. A vending machine nearby was untouched. He had not bought anything. His bag remained closed and untouched. No one saw him sleep, though his eyes would sometimes close for a few minutes at a time. But he never lay down or stretched out. He never seemed fully at rest. The airport had a constant hum. Announcements echoed from speakers. Suitcases rolled across tile floors. Children cried. People laughed, and the voice of travel filled the air. But the old man remained still, as if all of it passed through him. He didn't react to any of it. His focus never left the doors where passengers came out. Every time those doors opened, he sat up a little straighter. But then, after a few moments, he would relax again, his shoulders falling just a bit more. Some staff started calling him the ghost. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just their way of describing how quiet and still he was. He seemed like a shadow in the busy terminal, always there, but never part of anything. His face gave away nothing. His eyes were tired but alert. His back was straight, even though he looked worn down. On the third morning, he was still sitting there. People started to feel unsure. 3 days was a long time to wait in an airport. Something was not right. Yet no one wanted to push him. He seemed fragile. He seemed like he was waiting for something very important. Or maybe someone. But why didn't he ask for help? Why didn't he say anything? The airport staff had seen many things over the years. Missed flights, lost children, confused travelers. But this was different. This man wasn't lost in space. He seemed lost in time, as if he had come for something, and the world just kept moving past him. By now, most workers knew about him. Some avoided the area. Others walked past him on purpose, hoping to catch a clue. Some tried to make eye contact. A few even said hello, but he gave no reply. He only gave a small nod, nothing more. His eyes never left the arrival doors for long. Even people walking through the terminal noticed him. Travelers looked over at him and wondered who he was. Some guessed he was waiting for a loved one. Some thought he had nowhere else to go. Others simply didn't know what to make of it. But everyone agreed he was different. There was something about the way he sat, something quiet but strong. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem scared. He seemed patient, as if waiting was the only thing he could do, and he had accepted it completely. That patience made people uncomfortable because they didn't understand it. In a world that moved fast, his stillness was hard to explain. And so he sat there. Morning turned to noon. Noon turned to night. 3 full days passed. Still he waited. Still he watched. Still no one knew why. Sarah worked at the airport information desk. She had worked there for a few years. Her days were often filled with giving directions, checking flight updates, and helping travelers with small problems. She had seen all kinds of people pass through the terminal. Some were in a hurry, some were lost, and some were just tired. But she had never seen anyone like the old man. She noticed him on his first day. He was sitting quietly near the arrival doors. At first, she didn't think much of it. People often waited there for their friends or family members. But when she passed by again later that day, he was still in the same place. He had not moved much. His bag sat by his feet, and he kept looking toward the same set of doors. The next day, she saw him again. He was still in the same chair, wearing the same clothes. His face looked tired. His eyes looked heavy. But he didn't ask for help. He didn't talk to anyone. He just waited. Sarah found herself glancing at him more often. Every time she walked by, she checked to see if he was still there. And every time he was. Her coworkers also started to talk about him. Some joked that he had made the airport his home. Others rolled their eyes and said he was wasting space. A few even said he should be asked to leave. Sarah stayed quiet during those talks. She didn't laugh or agree. Something about the man didn't feel funny to her. He didn't look like someone who had no place to go. He looked like someone who was waiting for something important. Sarah tried not to stare, but it was hard. She kept watching him from a distance. She began to notice small things. He barely ate. He didn't drink much water. Sometimes staff brought him food, but he only took small bites. He always thanked them with a nod, but never said a word. At night, he stayed awake longer than most. His head would drop sometimes, and he would rest, but he never truly slept. He sat upright most of the time, hands on his knees, eyes fixed on the doors. She wondered if he was afraid. She wondered if he had lost someone. Her mind filled with questions, but she didn't ask any of them. Not yet. She thought maybe he needed space. She didn't want to scare him or make things worse. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Every day when she arrived for work, she checked to see if he was still there. Every day he was. That worried her. She knew something was wrong. People didn't just sit in airports for 3 days without a reason. Most travelers came and left quickly. Some stayed a few hours longer due to flight delays. But not this man. He had no luggage. He had no phone in hand. He wasn't checking a screen or talking to staff. He just sat there, still and quiet. She tried to ask around. She checked with baggage services and customer support. No one knew anything. No one had spoken to him. No one had a report of a missing traveler that matched his description. The mystery only grew. Sarah became more focused on him. She started walking by his area more often. She found herself pausing for a second longer each time. She watched his body language. He didn't seem dangerous. He didn't seem confused. He looked like someone holding something inside, something too heavy to speak about. Her heart felt heavy for him. She didn't know why, but she felt responsible. She didn't want to walk away like the others. She believed that even strangers deserve kindness. She remembered times in her own life when people had helped her for no reason. Now, she felt it was her turn. Still, she didn't rush to speak to him. She waited. She watched. She thought carefully about what to do. It wasn't just about asking him a question. It was about showing care without pushing too hard. She knew he didn't want to talk, at least not yet. So, she gave him time. As the 3rd day came, Sarah found herself thinking about him even after her shift. She went home and still thought about the man in the chair. She wondered what kept him there. She wondered if he had anyone left in the world. She thought about how lonely he must feel. She imagined what it would be like to wait that long without knowing what would happen next. Her concern grew stronger with each passing hour. She knew her coworkers didn't understand. To them, he was just another delay in their workday. But to her, he was more than that. He was someone in pain. She could feel it. She didn't need words to know. She saw it in his face. She saw in the way he moved, or didn't move. She saw in the way he sat so still, waiting for something no one else could see. Sarah didn't know what the next step would be, but she knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. She had waited long enough. She had watched long enough. Now it felt like time to do something. Not because she was told to, not because it was part of her job, but because she cared. She didn't have answers. She didn't even have a plan, but she had a feeling, and sometimes that was enough to make a difference. By the third day, the old man's presence had become a regular sight at the airport. Most workers now knew about him. Some avoided his area. Others passed by quickly. They had grown tired of seeing him sit there, silent and still. To many, he had become a problem. They saw him as someone who was not following the rules. Airport staff began to talk more seriously about what to do. Some thought he was loitering. They believed people should not stay in the terminal for so long without reason. The airport had rules. People were not allowed to stay there for days without a purpose. Even though the old man was quiet and did not cause trouble, some staff felt it was time to act. A few co-workers brought up safety. They said the airport had to protect travelers. They asked what would happen if other people started doing the same thing. They believed making an exception could lead to more problems in the future. One worker said the rules were there for a reason, and no one should be above them. Some people suggested calling security. Others said he should be asked to leave. They argued that the man had been given enough time. They had offered him food. They had watched him sit for days. He had not explained himself. In their minds, that was enough. They believed they had shown patience, but now that patience had run out. Sarah heard all of these talks. She stood in the break room while her co-workers shared their views. She listened to their complaints, but she didn't speak much. She felt torn. She knew there were rules. She knew the airport could not become a shelter. But something deep inside her said this situation was different. She had spent time watching the man. She had seen how still he sat. She had noticed how his eyes followed the same doors each day. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't loud. He didn't ask for anything. But he looked like he was holding on to something. He looked like someone who had nowhere else to go, at least not yet. Sarah tried to explain this to her co-workers. She said he didn't seem dangerous. She said he wasn't sleeping in the halls or making a mess. She reminded them he never asked anyone for money. She pointed out that he was always polite, even in silence. But most of them shook their heads. They said none of that mattered. They said rules were still rules. Some even grew annoyed with Sarah. They said she was getting too involved. They warned her that caring too much could lead to trouble. One person said it wasn't her job to fix everyone's problems. Another said it wasn't fair to let feelings guide decisions in a place that ran on schedules and order. Sarah felt frustrated. She didn't want to break the rules. She didn't want to create problems. But she also didn't want to ignore her own sense of right and wrong. She believed that rules should be balanced with care. She believed there were moments in life when a person needed to be seen, not judged. Each shift, she passed by the old man. She noticed how thin he looked. She saw how he barely moved. His hands rested on his knees most of the time. His eyes had lost their light. He looked like he was fading, but still waiting. Sarah felt a strong pull in her heart. She could not explain it fully. She just knew he needed help, not removal. She thought about her own life. She remembered times when small acts of kindness had changed everything. She thought about how easy it would be to turn away, to pretend he was just another traveler out of place. But she couldn't. Her instincts told her that this was more than it seemed. Finally, she made a decision. She would not wait any longer. She had given him space. She had watched for long enough. No one else seemed willing to take the first step. She knew the others might not agree. They might question her, but she was ready to take that risk. Her heart beat faster as she stood near his chair. She looked at him closely. His eyes were still on the doors. His hands still rested in the same place. He didn't know she was watching him, but she felt the weight of the moment. She was about to step past the line between doing her job and following her heart. She didn't rush. She took a deep breath. She knew this could go many ways. He might not respond. He might ask her to leave. He might still choose silence. But she had to try. Something inside her said this was the right time. Her choice was not about breaking rules. It was about understanding when a rule needed to bend. She didn't see him as a problem to be solved. She saw him as a person who needed a moment of care, and she was ready to give that moment, no matter what came next. The third day began like the others. The old man was still sitting in the same chair near the arrival doors. His bag was by his feet. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes stayed on the entrance where travelers came out. People walked past him again and again, but he did not notice them. His face looked tired, and his body seemed weaker than before. Sarah had been watching him for days. She had felt a growing need to understand why he was there. She had waited, hoping he might speak on his own. But now, the waiting felt too long. Her worry had grown stronger, and the feeling in her chest would not go away. She knew it was time to take a step forward. She walked slowly toward him. She kept her pace calm. She didn't want to scare him. She stood beside his chair for a moment. He didn't turn to look at her. His eyes stayed on the same doors, waiting for something or someone. She gently moved closer, then sat in the empty chair next to him. He still didn't speak. He didn't move much either. Sarah looked at him and saw how thin his arms were. His skin looked pale. His back was hunched forward just slightly. He looked like someone who had not eaten properly for days. His shoes were worn, and his coat had small tears in the sleeves. But his posture remained strong, even in silence. She stayed beside him for a few minutes without saying anything. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were filled with something she could not name at first. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something deep and heavy, something that had been held in for too long. His lips moved a little. Then his voice came out, soft and cracked. It had the weight of someone who had not spoken for days. His words came slowly. Sarah listened carefully, not interrupting. Each word felt like it cost him strength to speak. He told her that his son had been serving overseas. His son was a soldier. He had been gone for a long time. The man said he had received news that his son would be returning home. The flight was set to land at this very airport. The date had been clear. The father had arrived early to wait. He wanted to be the first face his son saw when he stepped off the plane. But something had gone wrong. The flight had landed just as expected. Passengers had come through the arrival doors. Families had reunited. Friends had hugged. But his son never came out. The father had waited for hours that first day, thinking his son might have been delayed inside. Maybe it was a long customs process. Maybe he had gotten held up with paperwork. But as the day ended and the airport began to empty, no one came to meet him. He had no way to reach his son. His phone calls went unanswered. He had no contact person, no clear help. He didn't know where to go or who to ask. So he waited. And when the night passed and there was still no word, he stayed. He sat in the same spot every day, hoping that the next group of arriving passengers would include his son. Sarah listened without speaking. Her heart ached as she heard his story. The pain in his voice was clear. He had believed that staying at the airport was the best choice. He didn't want to miss his son if he somehow arrived late. He didn't want to go anywhere else and risk missing him. He had not spoken to anyone before now because he didn't want to cause trouble. He thought maybe someone would come and explain things. He hoped someone would recognize him or help him without being asked. But no one had. He had been alone for 3 full days, holding on to nothing but hope. As Sarah listened, she realized how deep his fear must have been. To sit in silence that long, without answers, took strength. To wait without eating or sleeping properly showed how much he cared. His love for his son was clear in every word he said. But so was his confusion and sadness. When he finished speaking, he leaned forward and looked at the doors again. He had told his story, but he was still waiting. His eyes did not move from the place where he believed his son would appear. His body remained still, but his hands trembled just slightly. It was as if his whole world had been placed on pause. Sarah sat beside him quietly. She now understood the truth. This man was not lost. He was not confused. He was a father holding on to the only thing he had left, hope. And that hope had brought him to this chair day after day, hour after hour. She knew then that this was not just a story about a man waiting. It was about love. It was about patience. It was about not giving up, even when the world gave no answers. The truth was simple and heartbreaking. A father was waiting for his son, and no one had helped him until now. After hearing the old man's story, Sarah felt a deep weight on her chest. The man had waited at the airport for 3 days, hoping to see his son. Now she knew the reason behind his silence. She also knew he needed help, real help that went beyond food or kind looks. He had been holding on to hope without support, and she could no longer let that continue. She went back to her station with a clear goal. She would find out what happened to his son. She didn't know where to start, but she knew she had to try. She opened her computer and began with the basics. She searched through the flight record for the day the man said his son was supposed to arrive. She looked at the list of arriving flights and narrowed it down by time and destination. There were several planes that had landed that day. She focused on the ones that had come from overseas. She looked at arrival times. She looked at gate numbers. Then, she opened the passenger lists, checking each name. But nothing stood out. She didn't know the son's full name, so it was hard to be sure. She only had the father's short explanation and a rough idea of the flight. She went to the airline counter next. She explained the situation without using too many details. She asked if they had information about soldiers arriving from overseas on that day. The staff at the counter tried to help. They searched their systems and pulled up arrival data. But they had no report of an emergency. No one had reported a missing passenger. There were no alerts tied to that flight. Still, Sarah didn't stop. She knew there had to be more she could do. She contacted airport security and asked if there were any medical emergencies reported on that day. Maybe someone had collapsed after getting off the plane. Maybe there was an accident. But they had no records of anything matching the story. Sarah started to feel a bit lost, but she pushed forward. She searched online for military arrival protocols. She wanted to understand how soldiers return home. She read about how some came with groups, others return alone. Some were met by officers, while others quietly left on their own. There was no single process. She realized she would need to go further. So she found a number for the military office that handled transport and returns. She made a call and waited. The line kept ringing. Finally, someone answered. She explained what she knew, step by step, and asked if they could help. The voice on the other end was kind, but they needed more details. Without a name or service number, it was hard to check anything. Sarah returned to the old man and gently asked if he remembered the exact flight or had anything with his son's name. He opened his bag slowly and pulled out a folded piece of paper. On it was a printout of a flight confirmation and a name. With that, Sarah returned to her search. She gave the name to the military office. They promised to check their records and call back. Then she contacted the embassy. It was a long process, and she was placed on hold many times. She gave the same story, hoping someone would listen and act. As hours passed, Sarah stayed near her desk. She kept checking her phone. She refreshed her email inbox again and again. Each minute that passed without an answer made her more nervous. She looked toward the old man often. He remained in his chair. His eyes still watched the doors. His body didn't move. He had no idea how hard Sarah was working behind the scenes. Evening came, and the airport grew quieter. Fewer flights were arriving. Most workers had gone home, but Sarah stayed. She felt responsible now. She knew she couldn't go home without trying everything she could. She made a few more calls. She emailed again. She gave her number and asked to be notified if anyone learned anything. Her heart was heavy. She had hoped for a quick answer, but none had come. She didn't want to give up. She didn't want to walk past the man again tomorrow and still have no news. But her options were running out. She had reached nearly every source she could think of. The weight of the situation started to grow. Sarah felt tired. She had used all her energy trying to find a missing piece in a story that seemed broken. The silence on the other end of her calls made everything harder. The old man had waited for 3 days. Now, she was waiting too, but in a different way. Time moved slowly. She looked at the clock over and over. She wondered if her effort would bring answers or just more questions. She tried not to lose hope, but it was not easy. She thought about the father, about his patience and pain. She wanted to believe there was a reason for all of it. She wanted to believe something good would come. She remained near the information desk, keeping her phone close. The airport lights dimmed slightly as the night moved on. Announcements became rare. The space grew quiet. But inside her, the noise of worry continued. She had done all she could for now. The airport had become quiet. Most of the shops had closed. The last few flights of the day had landed. Some workers had left, and others were preparing to shut down for the night. The bright lights over the gates had dimmed slightly. The loud sounds that usually filled the air had faded. Only a few voices echoed in the distance. Sarah remained at her desk. She had been waiting for hours. Her phone stayed close to her hand. She kept checking it for missed calls or messages. She had done everything she could during the day. She had called the airline, the military office, and the embassy, but there had been no clear answers yet. She glanced toward the old man again. He had not moved much. He still sat in the same chair near the arrival doors. His hands were resting on his knees. His back was slightly bent. His face looked tired, more than ever before. The waiting had drained him. His eyes stayed on the same entrance, even as the night grew deeper. Then, just as the terminal began to settle into silence, the glass doors opened. A man stepped through. He wore a clean uniform. His boots were polished. His jacket was buttoned neatly. He stood tall, and his steps were slow but steady. He looked around the empty space, his eyes searching the area carefully. Sarah noticed him right away. He was not an ordinary traveler. He walked with purpose. His face was calm, but serious. His eyes finally found the old man sitting by the doors. He changed direction and walked toward him without stopping. The old man did not react at first. He had seen so many people walk through those doors, and none had been the one he was waiting for. But this time something changed. The soldier came closer and stopped in front of him. The old man slowly looked up. For a moment, nothing moved. The soldier leaned in and began to speak. His voice was low, and his tone was careful. Sarah watched from a distance. She could not hear the words, but she could see the change. The old man's hands started to shake. His shoulders became stiff. His eyes grew wide and soft. He covered his mouth with one hand and closed his eyes for a second. His chest rose and fell as if he had been holding his breath for days. Then, slowly he stood up. His legs were unsteady, and he placed a hand on the chair to keep his balance. The soldier gently helped him. They stood face to face for a few moments. The old man nodded again and again, as if trying to understand what had just been said. Sarah stayed back, giving them space. She could see that something important had happened. The man was no longer just waiting. He had received the news he had been hoping for, even if it had come late. The soldier motioned for the old man to follow. The old man reached for his small bag and held it close. His walk was slow, but he moved with more strength than before. The two walked side by side toward the exit. The old man didn't look back. His eyes were no longer on the arrival doors. He had waited long enough. Now he was being led to the place he needed to be. Sarah stood silently and watched them leave. Her heart was full, but also heavy. She had spent days wondering what had kept the man in that seat. Now she knew, and even though the truth had been hard to hear, there was peace in knowing he would no longer wait in silence. The image of the soldier and the old man walking side by side stayed in her mind. It felt like a moment out of time, something quiet but strong, something that words could never fully explain. There was sadness in the air, but also relief. Sarah sat back down and looked at the empty chair. It had been filled for 3 days by a man who had carried pain without showing it. Now it sat empty, but it was not just a chair anymore. It held a story. It held the memory of waiting, of love, and of quiet hope. The night moved on. Other workers returned to clean the area. A few asked if the man had finally left. Sarah nodded. She didn't say much. There was nothing more to explain. The look on the old man's face had said it all. The long silence was over. Though tired, Sarah felt a kind of peace. She had stayed when others walked away. She had listened when others did not. She had followed her heart and helped a man who had nothing but hope left. And in the end, that had made all the difference. A week had passed since the old man had left the airport. The terminal felt different without him. His chair by the arrival doors remained empty. People walked by it without thinking, but Sarah noticed it every time. For her, it was more than just a chair. It was a reminder of a story that had quietly unfolded right in front of her. Sarah had returned to her usual work routine. She answered questions, gave directions, and helped travelers like she always did. But part of her mind stayed with the old man. She often wondered how he was. She hoped his son was getting better. She hoped they were together now, no longer separated by silence and fear. One day, Sarah finished her shift and took a small break. She checked the notes she had written during the long search for answers. At the bottom of one page was the name of the hospital. She had written it down in case someone called back. No one had contacted her, but she kept the name anyway. She decided to visit, not out of duty, but out of care. She wanted to see for herself that the old man was okay. She wanted to know that the wait, the silence, and the pain had not been for nothing. The hospital was quiet when she arrived. She asked for the room number. After a short wait, she was allowed in. The hallway was clean and bright. Soft sounds came from machines and voices behind closed doors. She walked slowly, her steps light. When she reached the right room, she paused at the door. Inside, she saw the old man sitting beside a hospital bed. He was holding the hand of a young man who lay resting. The young man looked pale and tired, but his eyes were open. He was awake. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. His body was weak, but he was alive. The father looked older than before. His back was slightly bent, and his hands looked more worn, but there was a calm in his face. He was no longer searching or waiting. He had found what he was looking for. His eyes were softer now. His shoulders were not as heavy. He sat quietly, full of peace. Sarah didn't say anything. She stayed near the doorway, not wanting to disturb the moment. She simply watched. The two of them, father and son, were finally together. The silence between them now was not empty. It was full of comfort. The room had a quiet warmth to it. It was not loud or busy. There were no tears, no noise, just presence. The kind of presence that only comes after long fear and long waiting. It was a moment of healing, not just for the body, but also for the heart. Sarah smiled gently. She felt something shift inside her. It was like a knot had come undone. All the worry, all the effort, all the hours she had spent trying to help, it had led to this. It had led to a father no longer sitting alone in an airport chair. It had led to a son waking up to see someone who loved him waiting by his side. The old man looked up. His eyes met Sarah's. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His expression said everything. There was deep thanks in his eyes. There was relief. There was respect. He gave a small nod, slow and full of meaning. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried weight. Sarah nodded back. She understood. Words were not needed. The look in his eyes said more than any sentence ever could. It said, "Thank you for caring. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not walking away when it would have been easier." She stood there for a few more moments, then quietly stepped away. She didn't need to stay long. She had come to see that they were okay, and now she knew they were. As she left the hospital, she felt light. She had seen the end of a story that had begun in silence and confusion. She had witnessed pain turn into peace. She had seen the result of kindness, and that stayed with her. Over the next days, Sarah went back to work like normal. But something had changed in her. She looked at people more closely. She listened more carefully. She noticed things she might have missed before. A tired face, a quiet worry, a person standing alone for too long. She didn't try to fix everything. She knew she couldn't, but she also knew that small actions could lead to something bigger. A single step of care could bring someone out of darkness. She had seen it happen. The memory of the old man stayed with her. His waiting, his silence, his pain, but also his strength, his patience, and his love. And finally, his peace. Sometimes when she walked past the chair where he used to sit, she would pause. Not for long, just a moment to remember, a moment to feel thankful. Because that chair had once held a story, and that story had reminded her what really mattered: kindness, patience, and the quiet power of simply being there when someone needs it most.